As you can see, chat, we've got very consistent performance. I don't have to tell you. Let's go get lunch. I despise boxplots in the presentation of data. Why? Well, because the presentation of data should be honest and clear. Even if the conclusion being drawn is muddy, everyone should be able to clearly see the mud. And if the audience is more than a couple statisticians, there are people misreading the boxplots and potentially drawing the wrong conclusions. Side note, notice I said presentation of data. If someone is good at reading boxplots, they're a fine thing to use as part of your graphical analysis. The problem arises when you try to share it with others who aren't adept at reading them. Yeah, you can explain it to them, but first impressions are difficult to overcome. You throw up a boxplot, they draw the wrong initial conclusions, and then you spend a bunch of time working to reset their thinking. Sure, there are ways around this, but you shouldn't have to be combating parts of your own presentation. It's happened to me, not so good. Second, a boxplot is not a very effective communication tool if you have to explain it. That's sort of like some of my jokes that way. Not so funny if I have to explain them, which is also happened to me and not so great. So why do I think boxplots can be misleading? Well, let's take another look at what Chet was seeing. Here are some potential distributions for those boxplots. Notice I said potential distributions. That's because boxplots do not represent a singular distribution. Boxplots are a relatively simple model of the data, and if there's a valid, more complex model of a simple model, it generally means there are multiple more complex models the simple model could represent. They're not necessarily valid for your data, but that's what that simpler model could represent. If that just got confusing, don't worry. Just know that models of any type, a drawing, a mathematical model, a graphical model, can have more or less detail, and the amount of detail should fit the needs of the analysis. It's not the lack of detail that makes boxplots problematic, it's that the detail they do have can be misleading. Now, if we just looked at the distribution curves, there's no way we'd call this a consistent performance, like the guy presenting to Chet did. Now, if you don't know how to read boxplots, I don't want to just leave you in the dark, in case you run into them. So let me quickly break down how to read them. When you see a boxplot, think median. Boxplots live in the world of the median, not the mean, not the mode, just the median, of mean, median, and mode fame. The median is the data point right in the middle of your data set, if you don't remember. If you listed all your data points from smallest to biggest or biggest to smallest, it will be the one right in the middle. Now on a box plot, the line in the middle of the box, that's the median. So the data that you've got is split in half by that line. The lines making up the ends of the box split the data on that side of the median in half. So a simpler way to say it is that the three parallel lines across the box split up the data set into 4 quadrants. That puts 1/4 of the data points in each of the whiskers and 1/4 of the data points in each half of the box. Sometimes you'll see dots or asterisks or some similar indicator outside of the whiskers. It's a common but somewhat sketchy practice, and I don't think people realize it can be sketchy, which makes it even worse. By the way, those whiskers are the lines that come out the side of the box. Now, often software creates box plots that have a default value for what it calls outliers and uses dots or whatever to represent them. But that just encourages people to ignore those data points. Check out my previous video about outliers and why you should not ignore them. But basically, it's sketchy to ignore data points. And justifying it by calling them outliers, basically it's because they don't neatly fit into your data set, well, it's just gross. Now, the main way to avoid falling into the boxplot misinterpretation pit of death is to learn how to see the distribution being represented by the boxplots. The main way to do that is to compare the quadrants to each other. A shorter quadrant indicates the data points are denser there. It's the same number of data points, but just sort of packed into a smaller range than the other quadrants. This is especially deceptive when either or both sides of the box are large compared to the whiskers. It's really easy to see that and interpret it more like a histogram and think a lot of the data is represented by the box, like in this box plot. If you're not very accustomed to reading box plots, it would be easy to interpret this as a big bulky center. Nope, this data is bimodal like nobody's business. I'll wrap up by talking about alternatives to box plots without actually mentioning any of them. Ridiculous, you say? Yeah, probably, but justified ridiculousness. Ridiculous! There are tons of ways to graph data. When doing graphical analysis, we look at the data a number of different ways, not just one, and in different types of graphs. You want to look at it from different angles, slice it different ways. And when you get to presenting the data, you should be using a graph that honestly and clearly conveys the message of what you learned through your analysis. So there's no singular graph to represent the box plot in a presentation. There are a bunch depending on what you're trying to communicate. If you've got a favorite for a type of situation, please make a comment below about it. Also, please like if you liked, subscribe if you subscribed. That doesn't make any sense. And share with anyone you think would find this or really any of my content valuable. Thank you very much.